Welcome to this Killick Explains video, and welcome to a topical one, which is, I've talked about rainy day funds and the need to create one and set it to one side in other videos, but the question then is, how much do you need to set aside? You get asked that quite a lot. Now unfortunately, there's no absolutely clear-cut answer in pounds I can give you, but I can give you some guidelines. So why am I talking about this now? Well, there are plenty of reasons to worry that we may need a rainy day fund. Inflation is on the rise as I sit here making this video as we head towards the summer of 2022. Interest rates are on the rise too. No one knows quite how far and how fast, but central banks are looking to crank back on the monetary easing of recent years. Retail sales are under pressure, and volatility is, if nothing else, above average. If you look at the sort of CBOE VIX, the fear gauge, if you like, although it's not at crisis levels and far from them, it has been hovering quite well above its sort of 10-year average more recently. So plenty of reasons to be a little bit nervous. Now, where does the rainy day fund fit in? Well, just a reminder, we have a three pots approach, if you like. Number one is the rainy day fund, which I'll talk about more about in a moment. This is in terms of allocating capital, allocating wealth. Number two is to then organise money to meet those foreseeable calls on capital, those medium-term calls on your wealth that you can see coming up in the next, let's say, 5 to 7 years. And then the rest, so rainy day funds done, foreseeable calls on capital done, is the lifetime savings pot, and that's the one that should be allowed to build, hopefully inflation beating long-term wealth in the equity market. Now here, I want to cover rainy day money exactly. So the other two things I'll leave to one side, just going to focus on that first pot here. So, what are the key principles? First of all, it needs to be easily accessible. Make sure this is a pot you can get hold of and you will get hold of. Because what we're trying to do here is to have a cash-based fund that will stop us dipping into our long-term lifetime savings, for example. Stop us liquidating part of a share portfolio, right? Using shares like a cash point machine. We don't want to do that. Let's have this rainy day fund set up. And we're going to use it potentially to cover unemployment, illness, or just those one-off costs, leaky roofs and so on, that you suddenly find yourself having to pay for, you suddenly need cash quickly for. So next question then is, well, how much cover do I need? And I tend to work this on the basis of, think about what you'd spend in a typical month. You may need to work that out. How many of those months might you need to cover if your income suddenly dried up? And or you couldn't suddenly call on short-term insurance cover, for example. So how much cover would you need? Now, I did actually put this in a poll question out on social media recently. My rainy day money would last me or my family for how long, was what I asked, and here were the responses. Under 3 months, 14% of the responses I received. 3 to 6 months was 28% of the responses I received. 6 to 12 months, nearly half, around 46% of the responses I received. And I don't have a rainy day fund was around 12%. All right, so quite glad to see that the majority of people fell into the either 3 to 6 months or the 6 to 12. Now, I'll talk about those results in just a moment. What are my rules of thumb for rainy day money? And I'm talking about rainy day funds here, not the separate insurances you may have in place in addition, not instead of. So too much, first of all, is inefficient. So in an environment where inflation's raging a little bit, certainly compared to the last 10 years, you don't want to have loads of cash set to one side. There is a balance, okay? But too little is risky. You do need enough that you can dip into it and you can cover those emergency costs that I mentioned earlier on. So be a little bit careful, because what we're trying to do is avoid liquidating other assets, and we're going to avoid relying too heavily on insurance policies to kick in when they may take a while to actually pay out. So I would suggest that basically watch out for how much you've got in each rainy day fund, first of all. Only £85,000 per person per institution is covered by the Financial Services Compensation Scheme. But once you've got that caveat in place, and £85,000 might sound like a lot, probably above what a lot of people would keep as their rainy day funds, then here's my rule of thumb. 3 to 6 months of spending is probably enough for most individuals. But if you are the person responsible for a family's welfare, I would suggest in the current climate of uncertainty, 6 or more months is probably appropriate. Now some people will say, I want more than that, Tim. I want a year's money set to one side. Well, okay, that's fairly cautious, but that's up to you. It is ultimately a personal decision, but those are my guidelines. There are any guidelines, so if you'd like to know more about this topic, not to mention those foreseeable calls on capital, pot 2, lifetime savings, pot 3, then do access my extensive video library, killick.com/learn. And if you'd like to read all about it, as it were, there are various places you could go, which I have a fairly heavy hand in. One is these how-to guides. That'll be editor@killick.com, and there are 6 of them in total. And the other one is this thing, the latest issue of Confidant. And again, for a copy of that, hard or online, editor@killick.com.